So before we get started with the presentation, I wanted to kind of get to know you guys a little bit and let you get to know me. So my name is Carrie Gilchrist, and I work at Oakland University. Has anybody ever been to Oakland? On campus, just for a sporting event or a tour or something like that? Quite a few of you, okay. So I work in financial services there. So I work in the financial aid office and help to give students financial aid so that they can pay for college and books and things like that and go through and hopefully graduate at the end of all that. My main job at the university is to actually travel around, usually within like the Tri-County area, so in Wayne County and Macomb and Oakland County. And I talk to high school students usually, sometimes middle school students, and their parents and teachers about financial aid and getting ready for college. So today I'm here to talk to you a little bit about that, but I wanted to kind of share with you a little bit about my college experience. How many of you are thinking about going to college? All of you, excellent. I love to hear that. When I was in high school, it was never a question in my family if I was going to college or not. It was kind of an expectation that I was going to go to college and I could major in whatever I wanted. My parents didn't really have much input on that. They said, you know, whatever you're interested in, you can study that. And so I was convinced that I was going to go out of state. I had grown up in the Metro Detroit area, and I wanted to go other places. And it was, to me, in my head, an extra bonus because I wouldn't have to live at home. And I wouldn't have to follow my parents' rules about what time I had to be home and what time I had to be in bed. And I could be on my own. And I was really excited about that. And at the time, we didn't really have... There was internet, but it wasn't as big as it is now. And colleges didn't have websites, and mostly, she's raising her eyebrows back there. I know, that's crazy, right? So mostly what you relied on are things that schools mailed to you. So they would mail you brochures and postcards and view books so that you could see pictures of the campus and try and decide if that's somewhere that you wanted to go. So at the time, because I wanted to go out of state, I didn't go visit any colleges that I was interested in attending, because they were far away. I figure I would apply. If I got in, then I would move there, and I would, of course, like it. Why wouldn't I? So I started to visit colleges with some of my friends because they wanted someone to go with them, and I had nothing better to do, so I would go. And I visited a couple of colleges in Detroit, and I went to some that were a few hours away. And one day, my best friend came home from a weekend at her dad's, and she said, listen, I have to go and visit this college, and I don't want to go by myself, and I don't even know why I'm going, except that my mom knows somebody that went there, and they really liked it. So she's making me go. Will you go with me? And I said, all right, I could do a road trip. That'd be fun. So we hopped in her little blue car, and we drove to Albion College. And I loved it there. And I had so much fun visiting, and I met all these really nice people. And the college was exactly what a college should look like in my head, what I had pictured that to look like. It was a lot of green grass and trees and cool looking old buildings, and I really liked it. So I decided that that's where I was going to apply. And I only applied for one college. Looking back on that now, that scares me, because what if they had said no? But I liked it there so much that I was convinced they were going to say yes, regardless of what their admission requirements were. So I don't recall knowing what their admission requirements were. I don't remember if I had to have a particular GPA or if I had to take certain classes. I'm sure they had them, but I really wasn't aware of them at the time. And so I applied for early decision, and so they were going to tell me in December if I got in or not. And my best friend got her letter a few days after mine. And mine said that I got in, and she was really nervous. Well, what if I didn't get in? What if we're not going to college together? And that was like our big concern at the time. It wasn't how much money the college cost. I never even looked into whether or not they had my major there. And so my big concern was, will my best friend be able to go to this college too? Because we want to go together. So she also got in, and we went back to the college over the summer, and we attended orientation. Does anybody know what orientation is? What do you think it is?
You go
Yep. Learn about the school, and you get to pick classes, and you meet other students that are going to go to that school at the same time. And it's a lot of fun. And at Albion, parents went along on the same weekend that you went for your orientation, but you never saw them. Now, this was a really small campus. It was like 3 square blocks. So not seeing your parents at all over the weekend, even though they were there at the same time, was really amazing. They had it really well orchestrated. And so parents had their own kind of orientation to the college. And they learned all about how much it cost to go there, how you were going to pay for it, all the important things. And it never occurred to me to ask. I even bought my parents a funny little keychain that says, "My kid and my money go to Albion College." It turns out that Albion was really expensive, $25,000 a year. That was to go to school, to pay for tuition. It was to pay for room and board so that I could live on campus and they would feed me. And there were things like activities fees. So you would pay the school a certain amount of money, and they would use that to give to student organizations so that they could plan programs for you to attend. And so that was great. What I found out much later, many years later, like 7 years later, was that if I had chosen to go to a different school, like Michigan State or Oakland or Grand Valley, that it would have cost maybe like $7,000 or $8,000. And I had to take out loans when I went to Albion. And there were different ways that we paid for that. We took out loans, there were grants and scholarships and things like that. And so that was great. But my parents did a lot because they wanted me to go anywhere that I wanted. And so they did a lot to help me pay for college. But I had to take out loans. And so those you have to pay back after you graduate. So while I was at Albion, my very favorite part about college was my job. And they had what's called the Student Union, and it's a big building where they usually have like a food court, and there we had our mailboxes, and the bookstore was there, and there were studying rooms and computer labs and all different kinds of student organization offices and things like that. And I worked in that building. And I worked at the information desk. And we were open 24 hours a day. And eventually I got to be like the student supervisor of the information desk. And I loved my job so much. I was always there. I just thought it was really fun. I got to interact with people. I got to talk to other students. I got to like structure and organize things at the desk, and so that was really fun for me. The part that I liked least was going to class, unfortunately. That's a big part of going to college, right? Everybody knows that going to class is a huge part of going to college. It should be the primary part of going to college. Well, I wasn't so great at that. I would much rather hang out with my friends. And when I was in high school, I was one of those students that got A's and B's, and I didn't really have to do much. I did my homework, but it was easy for me to get those A's and B's. And so I figured that college would be the same. And it turns out not so much. So I actually almost didn't graduate from Albion. And that was a big shock to me because, remember, this has been a lifelong expectation that I was going to go to college and I was going to do well and I was going to graduate. I had always been a good student, so why would that not continue? So after that news came, I kind of buckled down and I went to class and I did all my homework and I did all my reading, and my grades improved. But once your grades are kind of down low, it takes a lot to get them back up. So you have to kind of make sure that you're going into that college experience with that in mind. That's going to be different from high school, but that you still have to work really hard. So I finally graduated from Albion with my bachelor's in psychology, and I knew that I no longer wanted to necessarily be a psychologist and have like my own clinical practice and things like that. I wanted to work at a college. And somewhere along the way, I figured out that you can get paid to work at college. And that's some people's careers. It's called student affairs, in the part that I wanted to work on. There's also professor jobs and faculty and things like that. But I thought that working at a college would be so much fun. I loved college. Why would I not continue to work at one? So I was really tired of school at that point. So I took a couple years off, but I knew I was going to go to grad school. And I found a grad school that I really liked. I really liked their academic program. So I went to Grand Valley State University, all the way over in Grand Rapids. And I went there without knowing a soul. So it was like starting all over again, which was really fun because you got to know new people and you got to make new friends and have different experiences, and that was great. So the best part about grad school was that you get to study what you like, and you get to kind of practice what you're learning in class by working there. So I had what's called an assistantship, and it was in housing and residence life. So I lived in a residence hall with all kinds of students. The first year I worked in a freshman residence hall, so it was all students that were at college for the first time. And I worked with their resident assistants who planned programs for them and gave them opportunities to do different things, and it was really fun. And my second year, I worked with upperclassmen in the apartments. And so they had these, we called it Candyland because they were all pastel colors. There was like blue and pink and yellow. And it was really pretty. And it was like a self-sufficient apartment. They had bedrooms and they had living rooms and kitchens. And it was harder because you have all that stuff in one building, so you don't ever leave unless you're just going to go to class. So it was harder to get students to interact with each other. But it was still a really good time, and I still really loved it. So I graduated from there. On the first day of grad school, though, I knew that I was going to continue school after that, because the dean of students came in to our little workshop that me and the rest of the people in my class were in, and she said, okay, take out a piece of paper and write your name at the top. And I thought, it's the first day and you're giving us a quiz? Are you kidding? And she said, now, in front of your name, write doctor. I wrote doctor, and she said, now, if you like the way that looks, be prepared to go to school for even longer than you're here. If it doesn't really matter to you that there's doctor in front of your name and you don't have any preference either way, then you're going to be here for 2 years, and then you'll be done with school forever. So I knew when I graduated from Grand Valley that I wanted to go and get my PhD. So before I left, I searched around for different schools, and I found a program that I really liked. And they expected you to work while you were in school so that you could apply what you were learning in school to your job. And that was really cool. So the place that I wanted to go to school was Oakland University. And I had a couple jobs after I graduated from Grand Valley and before I got ready to go to graduate school again to get my PhD, and ended up at Oakland University for a job, which was really fortunate because then I could go to school there as well. So 5 years ago, I started my PhD, and I just finished in December. So I'm finally done with school forever and ever and ever until I get bored again and I decide that I want to go back. So what has happened over that time is that I began to really appreciate a college education. I had fun in the classroom, learning about different things and applying what I learned in my job, having discussions with my friends about what we were learning, and it was really exciting. I also, through my job and through continuing my education, have learned that college is really expensive. And there wasn't much preparation I did to get to that spot where I could know ahead of time what preparations I should have made, save enough money to pay for it, not have to take out loans and that kind of stuff. So I'm really glad that you're here today so that we can talk a little bit about some different options for preparing for that cost. That stuff I'll use later. So today we're going to talk about just some different things, some costs you should consider and things like that for financial aid and all that good kind of information. You're welcome to take notes. You're welcome to ask questions. I'll definitely take questions at the end as well. So if you want to write them down, you can. So there are a lot of things, as we kind of already touched on a little bit, that you need to prepare for when you are thinking about going to college. And all of you are thinking about that. So how many of you are in high school? All of you. 9th grade? 10th grade? 11th grade? 12th grade? Excellent. So we have everybody. Anybody in junior high? All right, couple folks. Okay. So one of the things that you need to think about when you are attending college is your career choice. What do you want to do for a living? And most people will change their career choice, and they will a couple of times throughout their life. Lots of people will change their major. But you have to think about what the education requirements for that career choice that you have in your head now will be. So does it require that you just go to a trade school? Does it require an associate's degree, which is a 2-year college degree? Does it require a bachelor's degree? Do you have to go to graduate school? Is it really recommended that you get your PhD? It all depends on what career choice you choose. So for example, a friend of mine at Oakland, her husband is a chef, and he needed to get his associate's degree in culinary arts. So he didn't need to go to a 4-year university. He didn't need to get 2 or 3 different degrees. He just had to go to, he actually went to Schoolcraft and got his culinary arts degree, and he's a chef. There are a couple of friends of mine that are veterinarians. They're veterinarians, and they had to go and get their bachelor's degree, and then they also had to go to graduate school. But there's only a few schools in the country that have veterinary programs. So they had to look very specifically at what schools they wanted to attend. You also have to think about what kind of college you wanted to attend. When I was looking at schools, I had a particular picture of what a college looked like in my head, and I couldn't imagine going somewhere where it was in the middle of a city. I've been to schools like that now because my taste changed after I went to Albion, but I wanted somewhere that was far enough to drive, but not far enough where I couldn't go home for a weekend if I wanted to. And I wanted it to have lots of grass and trees, and I wanted it to be kind of small because I was used to a small school at that point. But it was a different kind of decision for me than some of my other friends made. So it all depends on kind of personal taste. So primarily there's a couple of different types of colleges in the US. There's a community college, and those are typically 2-year schools, and you go and get your associate's degree there. Those will allow you to do all kinds of careers and things like that, and it will also allow you to get kind of a jump start into your bachelor's degree. So you can transfer to a 4-year institution, and there's colleges and universities that are available for 4-year degrees and graduate degrees and things like that. Does anybody know the difference between a college and a university?
A university is bigger than a college, and
Yep, can be bigger.
more focused on certain topics.
It can be, yep. Any other ideas? You're kind of raising your hand a little bit.
Is it like the type of teaching that they do and the methods that they implement in a classroom?
Sometimes. The kind of teaching that they do, that kind of leans toward it a little bit. A college awards bachelor's degrees, so that takes 4 years to get if you go the regular full-time rate. The university offers bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and doctoral degrees. So 3 different kinds of degrees that you can get at a university.
Bigger classes too, bigger classes than a...
Sometimes, not always, not always. It depends on the class sometimes. The class size varies, usually based on the topic of the class, how many people they have that are able to teach that class. And then the university also decides the cap on it. So a lot of times students will take like a Communications 101 course at a university, and that orients you to the university and talks to you about college and all these things that you need to know. And if the entire freshman class took that, and there was only one professor, it would be a 2,000 person class.
Yes.
So we don't, definitely at Oakland, and I'm sure no place else, has a classroom space that big for 2,000 students. So,
They were kind of big over there.
yeah, and there are some classes that will have hundreds of students in it. It's a lecture class usually, and so it's, you know, in big lecture halls and auditoriums and things like that. But sometimes they will make sure that there are multiple people teaching the same class so that they can break it up, so that there are maybe 25 people or 15 people in one class. So class size is definitely an important consideration. Some folks will ask universities, what's your average class size, so that they can know, am I going to be in a big lecture hall with people all the time? Is it going to be something where I have the individual attention of a professor? And that's definitely a benefit. So in terms of school selection, there are lots of things that are important to kind of figure out beforehand before you attend a college. So you remember when I was looking at Albion College, I had no idea if they had my major. I had no idea how much it cost. I knew I was going to live on campus because it was like 2 hours away from home, and I wasn't going to drive 2 hours. So you want to definitely check out to see if the major that you're interested in taking is available at that school. I've had students in my classes that will tell me after a semester that they're transferring because we don't have interior design. And they needed to definitely know that before they spent a semester at Oakland. Because when you transfer classes, sometimes that's going to not benefit you at your new school, because sometimes they don't accept the class that you took at your previous school. You definitely want to know how much tuition is. How much is it going to cost you to go there? Are there additional fees that they charge for student activity fees or for the recreation center? Do they charge registration fees where you have to pay to register for classes? You need to figure out if you want to live on campus or if you need to live on campus. Some schools have the requirement that all freshmen live on campus their first year in college. Some schools say you don't have to live on campus. Some schools don't have housing. So you need to figure out how far that is from you, if that's something that you're interested in is living on campus, if you want to live at home with your parents and just commute to school, if you want to live off campus in an apartment by yourself or with some friends. Those are all really good, important decisions that you need to know before you decide to pick a school. Yes?
Now, if you do decide not to live on campus, how much will that decrease from your college fee?
That's a great question. So if you didn't hear her, she asked if you decide to live on campus, how much is that going to decrease your college fee? Typically, that means that you don't have to pay housing costs then, and you only pay tuition and you pay fees if the school charges any. So depending on the school, it could take 25% of your cost down, 50%, 2/3. It just depends on the school, because they're all going to have different fees for the housing and everything. The room and board is what we call it usually.
Parking too, there's parking, there's registration fees.
Oh yeah, there's all kinds of fees. There's all kinds of fees, yep. And there's a session in the future where we're going to talk about what fees and things like that and kind of what the cost of college is. Yes?
Like out-of-state colleges usually more expensive?
Yes, she asked if out-of-state colleges were more expensive. That is usually true. There are some schools that will offer a scholarship to cover the difference between in and out-of-state tuition. But if you go out-of-state, then you're typically going to pay more because they have an out-of-state tuition fee. And that's different than their in-state tuition fee. Very true. Okay. So you also want to know, if you decide not to live on campus, how much is it usually to live in the surrounding area? Sometimes it's really expensive. Sometimes it's not so expensive in student housing. You need to know the quality of the housing. You want to make sure that you're not going to live in a basement apartment that floods every other week. You definitely want to know that kind of stuff. So it's important, if you decide, even if you're not going to live on campus, that you look at the surrounding area for where you can live and how much that's going to be. And those mandatory fees, so the parking fee and the registration fee and the student activity fee, all kinds of money that campuses can charge. You also want to know what kind of sports and clubs and activities are available. Even though classes are primarily the reason that you're at college, you're also there for social activities. You can't just be in class and study homework all the time. You have to have some kind of social outlet. You have to be able to make friends with people. You want to join clubs where you can learn about new things, or you can share hobbies that you're interested in. There's all kinds of networking organizations and things like that for professionals. And so it's a good opportunity to kind of look at what other things does the college offer besides your major and besides housing, and what classes you want to take. So in relationship to that, there are definitely costs that you need to consider as well. So I wouldn't recommend necessarily picking a college and deciding this is where I want to go without knowing how much it's going to cost you. That's what I did. And although I wouldn't change anything about my college education, I would still choose to go to Albion because it provided me with a lot of great experience. I definitely would have maybe weighed the options of what it cost a little bit differently. So there are two different types of costs that schools will consider. So there are direct charges, and those are things like tuition, housing, and any of those mandatory fees. Those are things that are charged directly by the university to you. There are also indirect expenses. So these are things that are still going to cost you money, but that the college isn't going to charge you for. So things like books and supplies. How many of you have to pay for books in high school? Nobody, right? They all give them to you, or they rent them, or something like that. In college, you have to pay for them. You have to buy them. Sometimes you're lucky and you can get used books from the bookstore. Sometimes if you don't shop early enough for your books, or maybe you add a class after the semester starts and they don't have any used books, then you have to buy a brand new textbook, and they're expensive. They can be $75, $150, $200 for a textbook. And at the end of the semester, if you don't need that book anymore and you choose to sell it back or sell it to another student, you're not going to be able to sell it for as much as you paid for it. So it's definitely something that is important to know how much they anticipate your books will be. And it might be different for an English major versus a science major versus a psychology major. So it's definitely an important thing to determine how much those extras are going to cost you in terms of books and supplies and things like that. You'll want to know if they require you to have a computer or if they supply them. There's also housing. If you choose to live off campus, how much is it going to cost you to live in an apartment off campus? How much is it going to cost you to live at home and commute? You'll need a car and gas and car insurance. And what happens if your car doesn't break down? You need maintenance money and things like that. There's also kind of miscellaneous living expenses that they include in that cost. So they will say, okay, well, you need a toothbrush, toothpaste, shampoo, conditioner, clothes. All those things kind of support you going to school. So they kind of throw in some money for that as well. So that determines at the school how much they think that you're going to spend at that school, and it's called cost of attendance. So this is a look at the different types of schools and what it would cost per year to attend there. So down over there on the second column that you see, 4-year, it's an in-state college, and you're going to be a resident of the college, so you're going to live on campus. The average for what it will cost you for 1 year in the U.S. is $21,447. And that's for the tuition and the room and board and the indirect expenses as well. The 4-year in-state commuter, where you live at home, these are all assuming that you're living at home when it says commuter, is going to be about $12,560 on average. That's significantly less, right, than living on campus. But it also includes not just tuition, but all that transportation money that it'll cost you as well. So there's a 4-year out-of-state residence. So you were talking about out-of-state colleges and if they cost more. They absolutely cost more. $33,973. And then the 2-year in-state commuter, that would be like a community college or a trade school, would be about $78.78. So those are some really wide ranges of costs that you have for the type of school that you're attending and if you're going to live on campus or not. And then private schools are even different, and you'll notice that they're a little bit more expensive even if you're a commuter student. So the first one, the 4-year resident, is $42,224. And then the 4-year commuter, if you live at home, is going to be $32,135 on average. So that's an even broader range. They're kind of a little bit comparable with the out-of-state living on campus college, but not much. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think when you pay more, like for out of state, you're getting a better education, or is it all the same education, in state or out of state? Because you got like Harvard and Yale and all these other
Sure.
top colleges.
Sure.
They do cost more, but isn't the education higher there?
Um,
You're looking at the same level of education.
It does depend a little bit on the rigor of the education. You know, you've heard of national rankings for schools and their programs and things like that. So that higher tuition is sometimes paying for the professor that's teaching the class. So if you have someone that is an expert, it's gonna be a little bit more to pay them than it is somebody who has been educated on the topic, for example. They're also paying for things like technology. Students are really demanding about what kind of technology they want on a campus, how up to date it needs to be, and they're trying to remain competitive with other schools as well. So they're trying to make sure that they have the best science labs, the best computer labs, the best technology, so that students are getting that great education and that they're remaining competitive with other schools so that their students aren't behind academically. I don't necessarily know that I would say it's a better education. Better is kind of relative, I guess. But it's definitely, it's a different experience, and it has a lot to do with the student's success at that school as well. You know, if they're in a good fit at one school, but it's not a good fit at another school, they're not going to do as well academically at the school that is not a good fit than they might at the school that they fit well with, because it has to do with their level of comfort and concentration and focus and all that stuff.
Okay, then it's not a matter of better, then why would you pay more money for out of state than in state? Why the difference in the amount of tuition that you're paying?
They could have a major that somewhere in the state doesn't have. They could have opportunities or experiences that you want that a school close by doesn't have.
So not necessarily every school will have like the major that you want to study.
Exactly. Yep, that's absolutely true. Not every school is going to have the major that you want to study. So, for example, my student that transferred because we didn't have interior design. We never had interior design. So when she was looking, she may not have known what major she wanted to choose. She may have thought that she was going to start with a bachelor's degree in, you know, something else. And then for graduate school, maybe maybe she was going to go for fine arts as a bachelor degree and then go to grad school for interior design. Maybe she changed her mind. Maybe she just didn't look at it ahead of time. You know, maybe she wasn't aware that that's something that she needed to consider. That's a very real possibility as well.
Another question.
Sure.
Like my daughter is right now, she's in high school, she's in 9th grade. You know, the cost of living goes up and all that. So
Mhm.
when do we start looking for colleges, asking how much the cost of tuition is and so forth? Do we just wait and give it a couple more years, or should we do our research ahead of time?
I definitely think you should do your research ahead of time. I think that, you know, junior high, 9th grade, 10th grade, those are great times to start visiting colleges. Even if it's not for like a formal tour or something like that, maybe it's to go and see a play or a sporting event, to just try and start to get the feel of what the campus environment is like. You know, go to several of them. Start to have that conversation, and this goes for the rest of you too, with your parents about what kind of college you want to go to. What do you want to look at in terms of comparing colleges? That's definitely a great thing to do, and it's never too early to start looking at cost either. That's definitely important, and that's kind of what we're talking about today, is preparing yourself ahead of time for how to cover those costs. Did I see another hand up a few minutes ago? No? We're good? Okay. So if I were to say to you, or most people, how do you pay for college expenses? Most people are going to answer financial aid. Most folks haven't thought ahead of time to decide how they're going to pay for college, how much money they actually need. And so they're relying on that kind of nebulous financial aid. And really kind of, what is financial aid? So financial aid is money that's provided to you by a resource other than yourself or your parents to pay for college expenses. So there are actually 4 types of financial aid. The first is scholarships. The second is grants, and then there's student employment and student loans. And these are all very different from each other. So who can tell me what a scholarship is? Yes?
It's an amount of money that like organization grants to a student for like certain things.
Okay. Can anybody tell me how it's different from a grant? That's all right. You're pretty much good. Yes, go ahead.
I don't know, but I'm guessing it's like when an organization pays you to do like a certain thing. You know?
Sometimes that can be true.
Money that you don't pay back, that's the difference. Like scholarships, you don't have to pay back that money.
You don't pay back
Sometimes
grants
you have to
either.
win it. But grants, also with grants, some you have to pay back and some you don't have to.
Never have to pay back grants.
Never have to pay back?
Never ever. So, what the difference between a scholarship and a grant is this. A scholarship is typically merit-based. So a student is required to get a certain GPA or a certain ACT in order to be eligible for that scholarship. And sometimes, you're right, they do have scholarships that require you to be a volunteer somewhere. They require you to put so many service hours in. Sometimes scholarships are given from the school that you attend. Sometimes they're given from a private organization like a corporation or a foundation. And those are awarded to students based on their own specific criteria. Grants are also free money that you can keep. You don't have to repay it. But they are given and they're need-based. So there's a financial need formula that determines how much in scholarships and grants and subsidized loans and student employment you're eligible for. And so that will help a school determine the type of aid that you get. There's also student employment, and there's a couple of different ways that student employment will pay out on a college. How many of you have a job? Sort of, kind of. You go, but they don't pay you, is that what it is?
It's basically like I babysit.
Okay.
It's very occasionally.
Very sporadic, okay. Still income though, still a job, that's good. So student employment on a college campus can work a couple of different ways. Almost every department on a college campus will hire students. So they will hire them in the rec center. You can teach fitness classes, or you can work with students in their training programs. You can be the person that walks around and wipes all the sweat off equipment. You can sit at the front desk and check students in, all different kinds of jobs. You can work in an academic office, doing filing or answering phones or some special projects or something for that particular department. There's all kinds of different things that you can do. There are 2 different types of student employment on a college campus. There's regular student employment, and that means that the department that hires you, you work however many hours a week, usually around 10 to 15, and they pay you your paycheck every couple of weeks out of their departmental budget. So that's kind of how a regular job works. You go to McDonald's, you punch in people's orders, every couple of weeks, they give you a paycheck. Well, there's also what's called work-study student employment. Work-study is where the federal government gives you a grant. And the way that you get the money from that grant is that you get a job on campus, and it's a work-study job. And rather than the department paying you out of their departmental budget, they pay you from that federal grant that you got. So you have a certain amount of money that you can earn each year. You have a certain number of hours that you work. It's maybe 10 to 15, or the same as the regular job. But where the money comes from for your paycheck is different. There's also student loans. Dun, dun, dun. Everybody thinks, well, I'll just get a loan to pay that off. How many of you have parents who have talked about having a loan? Paying a mortgage, credit, having a credit card. So how many of them were really excited to have that loan? You were really excited to have a loan. Most people don't enjoy having a loan. You're living off credit. So I know the previous woman from Walsh College that talked to you talked about credit and being in debt and how you can borrow money ahead of time, you know, if you want to get an particular video game or something like that, and you can say, well, I know I have birthday money coming, or I have my allowance, can I just have that money now so that I can get this game right now? This is kind of the same thing. You want to go to college now, but you don't have the money saved up. And so you borrow a loan. So there's different loans that you can get. You can get them from the federal government, you can get them from banks, you can get them from private lenders. But it's all living on borrowed money. So you have to pay loans back. And it's definitely a good investment for the people that are lending you the money because they're going to charge you interest. And that's going to mean that you're paying back a lot more than what you initially borrowed. So if you had your choice between getting scholarships and getting grants and maybe working a job on a campus and not getting loans and doing all those things and then getting loans, which would you choose?
Scholarships, grants, and student employment.
All right, so you don't want loans. Why don't you want a loan?
Why would you want a loan and pay more interest on something that, for the money that they're gonna give you? I'd rather just rely on the scholarships, work hard and study now, prepare myself for college, get good grades where you can earn scholarships, have grants from the government. I just remembered, there is Pell Grants, which you do have to pay back.
You do not have to pay back
You don't
Pell
pay back
Grants.
Pell
No, you
Grants?
do not.
I thought you did.
Nope.
And then student employment, which you can work a little bit, make a little bit of money, and then, you don't even have to rely on the loans.
Mm-hmm.
But can I just go back to when you said you took out loans? I wanted to ask you a question which just came to my mind. When do you think in time will they need a loan? If she wants to study like a 4-year university, work on a bachelor's degree, then go on to medical school for another 4 years, if that's the plan.
Mm-hmm.
When do you think in that point of time will she need a loan?
Depends on how much she prepares ahead of time. It depends.
Do you think the grants will always be there, that she'll qualify for grants?
Well, it depends. Usually undergraduates will qualify for grants, and there aren't very many available for graduate students. That may change over time as more students are going to graduate school.
Okay.
There may be particular grants or scholarships that graduate students can get from the college or university that they attend. But as far as the loans go, it depends on how much you prepare ahead of time. It depends on how much schooling you get. When I went to grad school,
Okay.
I had gone to Albion and I took out a lot of loans to pay for it. But when I went to grad school and when I went to get my PhD, I didn't take out any loans because one of the benefits of working for the university was that they paid a certain amount of my tuition every year. So I stretched that tuition out over the course of time so that I didn't have to pay any money. So that was, a benefit that I had, but not every major has that benefit. So it depends. Because of my major in grad school, I worked for the university, and so I got that benefit. But there are also graduate assistantships where you do research for the department that you're studying in, or you teach a class or something like that, and they will give you a tuition stipend in return for that.
Yeah, I remember when I was at Wayne State, I did an internship, a parenting
Mhm.
internship, where I worked for the university, but through a center in Detroit.
Yeah,
So, I'm very familiar with that.
sure.
But I just wanted to see, like, what point in time do you think she will need loans? Because I know there are grants, there are scholarships, or, we can help her, or she can work a little bit or whatever.
Hmm.
But I wanted to see, because I know a lot of that money is probably not available when you graduate, when you go to graduate school.
Hmm.
Like when you're working on the next degree of level.
Yeah,
If it's medical or a PhD or
right.
master's degree, I know that money is not there.
Yep, not always in grants and
Not always.
scholarships.
Yeah.
So, but it depends on how much you prepare, how much you're able to prepare,
Yeah.
ahead of time. So can anybody think of a reason why you would get a loan?
So you needed money quickly, like it was something that you had to pay off and you don't have the money, but you needed to, they'll start charging fees, or you can't get somewhere, like your car broke down and you need to,
Mhm.
to fix it, you take out a loan so you could buy the parts or whatever you need
Yep, that's a great example. So if you need money quickly, if maybe something happened and you had to use the money that you had set aside for something else, if maybe there's an unexpected expense that comes up and you need to fix your car in order to be able to get to college. Those are all very good reasons why you might take a loan. Some people might take a loan because they haven't prepared ahead of time. So it is good that you are all here in high school, 1 to 4 years away from going to college. You still have some time to prepare. That's definitely a good thing.
How do you prepare?
By doing classes like this, by saving and investing and things like that. So how much do you think in financial aid was given to undergraduate students last year? Take some guesses.
1 billion?
1 billion. What are some other guesses? What do you think?
500 million.
500 million? Okay. Yeah.
About 10 million.
10 million. Any other guesses? It was really low. 177 billion, 600 million. That is a lot of money. Can you imagine what your bank account would be like? Can you imagine the shopping you'd be able to do? How many bills you'd be able to pay? That'd be awesome, right? The thing is, that money was spread over thousands and thousands and millions of students that go to college. So the graph underneath it, I hope you're able to see it clearly. 20% of that was given in federal Pell Grants. So the Pell Grant is the biggest federal grant that a student can receive. So 20% of that, so 34.8, was given to college students to pay for expenses, and they don't have to pay that back. There's also institutional grants, so over there on the left-hand side, and that's 17%. So even though you might not be eligible for a federal grant, you might still be eligible for a grant from the college or the university that you attend. So that's different. That's definitely good news. And even if you're eligible for a Pell Grant, you might still be eligible for a grant from the college or university that you attend. There's also state grants. So the state of Michigan and most states will provide scholarships and grants to their students. So state grants make up about 5% of that. There are other things like private employer grants. So things like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Target, Meijer. All of these companies give scholarships and grants to students. So I just realized employer is spelled wrong on there. Where's the L? That's odd. I didn't make up that graph, so it wasn't my mistake. But all those grants and scholarships from different places make up probably, if I do the math really quickly in my head, probably about 41% of financial aid. So that means that if we're going to translate that roughly, maybe you have half the money in grants to pay for college. That would be great. That's not always the case, so don't get too excited. But sometimes you have all that money. There's also additional money. So education tax benefits make up 8% of that. Other federal programs, so things like Michigan Works or something like that, is an unemployment benefit, will pay for you to go to college and things like that. Federal work study makes up 1% of that. So remember I said there were 2 types of jobs on a college campus, work study and non-work study. Work study only makes up 1% of those. So most of those jobs are going to be non-work study jobs. The biggest percentage is student loans, federal loans down there in the bottom. That's 39%. So you can tell, because most people most of their financial aid packages are loans, that most people haven't prepared ahead of time. So how much control do you have over what aid you receive? How many of you think that you have complete and total control and you get to choose what money you're getting? Ooh, no hands. I like that. All right. How many of you think that you have like 50% control? That you have a say in what you get? You? And 2, 3. All right. How many of you think that you have 0% of control? 3. All right, so we have a tie for 4. All right, so the 0% control people win. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily always the case, but that's a good thing for you. So in terms of scholarships, so we have the 4 types of aid up there. In terms of scholarships, you have nearly 100% of control over what scholarships you get. So I'd say probably 85 to 90% you have control over that. Why do you think that is?
Because we think we could, like, we want to do it.
Because you can pick if you want to apply for the scholarship. That's very true. What else do you have control over? Yeah.
Scholarships are also based on your GPAs and what grades you get.
Yep, scholarships are based on your GPA and what grades you get, and so you have control over that. That's definitely true.
Are scholarships, like, will they give you a scholarship if you take a certain class?
Yep, you can get a scholarship if you take a certain class.
So you have control over that.
Yep, you have control over what classes you take. You can get a scholarship for volunteering. So you have control over if you volunteer somewhere. The scholarship for this class, they were talking about how you can earn points for volunteering and, you know, doing a skit and bringing a friend. All of those things you have control over, right? You can decide, I'm totally going to, like, give it up, and I'm going to go up there and I'm going to do a skit in front of everybody, even though maybe nobody laughs. It's okay, it's worth it, because I'm going to get a scholarship, right? That's a good reason. Any other reasons? All right, so grants. There are probably, I would say, closer to 0% that you have control over what grants you get. Anybody know why? Because the decision is made by the federal government, that's true. What else? Hmm? Exactly, it's need-based, so you can't control your family income. So need is determined by filling out the Fafsa. How many of you have heard of Fafsa? Excellent. So Fafsa stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, and it's how students apply for financial aid to get scholarships and grants and student employment and loans. And grants are need-based, so that's how the school determines financial need, is they use the information on the Fafsa. So you have a little bit of control over how much your salary is at your job, or you could go to a higher paying job maybe. Some people can't. You could maybe have control over some other aspects of the grant, like if it's maybe merit-based as well as need-based, and you have to have a certain GPA, or so you have to volunteer a certain number of hours, as well as have financial need. You have a little bit of control, but not much. That's mostly decided by the federal government and by the college or university that you attend. There's also student employment. How much control do you have over student employment?
Full control.
Full control over student employment. That is true. You have 100% control. Well, maybe 95% control, because somebody has to decide to hire you. But you have 100% control over if you're going to apply for a job, if you're going to persist in applying for jobs, even if maybe you haven't gotten interviews for the ones that you wanted the most. All of that can help you pay for college and things like that. The student employment, you can pay for your living expenses or your books, tuition even, and things like that. But you have to first decide that you're going to get a job. And what about student loans? How much control do you have over getting student loans?
Probably about 95% control, like you said, because they have to decide to give you a loan.
So what do you think getting a loan is based on as a student? Income? You're good with it. Grades? Okay. Did you have a right hand raised in the back? No, just stretching? Okay. Anybody else? All right, so there's a couple of different requirements for getting a loan. So for example, if you get a federal loan, they give it to you just because you're a student. And every student is guaranteed to get a student loan unless they've been in school for too long and they've used up all their loan eligibility. Everybody's going to get a loan if they fill out a Fafsa. So you don't necessarily have to take that, so you have a little bit of control there. But they're going to offer you the loan based on the fact that you're a student and what grade you're in. So if you're a freshman in college, you get a different amount than if you're a sophomore, than if you're a junior or senior. And so that has a little bit kind of to do with how much of that loan you get. Yes?
Would you know if the amount is larger for like a senior,
Mm-hmm.
a student, like a freshman? Like, how much would a senior get? Would they get more than a freshman?
Well, a senior, if they're getting, the juniors and seniors get the same amount. So as a freshman, you get $5,500. As a sophomore, you get $6,500. And as a junior and a senior, you get $7,500 each year. So if you think about those costs that were on that chart that we looked at earlier about how much each school is going to cost on average for 1 year, that doesn't make up a large majority of your money, right? It doesn't make up for a large majority of the cost. So that loan is a little bit based on grades because you have to maintain a certain grade point average every year in order to be eligible for those loans. So it is based on grades a little bit. You have to get a minimum 2.0 grade point average to get a loan. So if you fall below that, then you usually lose your financial aid. And they say you can't have financial aid unless you're going to be a good student. So it's definitely important to not follow my example and actually go to class from the start and do your homework and things like that. I got to be a much better student after that, by the way. So there are other ways to pay for college as well, and I want to make sure that I leave enough time for an activity. But there are things like the Coverdell Education Savings Accounts, UTMA and UGMA accounts. There's MET and MESP, and we'll touch briefly on those. Coverdell Education Savings Accounts are contributions that families can make to a student's account, and it cannot exceed $2,000 in a given year. And they're able to cover qualified expenses at a school. So it's usually tuition, housing, and required supplies like computers and things like that. Yes?
I thought this slide before this, but for scholarships, isn't there a thing where you're allowed to earn a scholarship based on like your first year's performance in college?
Yeah, at some schools you can earn a scholarship based on your first year performance. So perhaps you weren't eligible for a scholarship when you first came in, or maybe you were, but it wasn't as high as you wanted it to be. There are some schools that will offer scholarships to you in your sophomore, junior, and senior year based on your academic performance in that first year. There's also sometimes academic scholarships that the departments will give you for 1 year usually. They're sometimes not renewable, but at least for 1 year where you've performed excellently in that subject, or you volunteered to be on a committee or something like that, and you could earn a scholarship that way. Absolutely.
Because like, I was watching one of my family friends or someone, apparently she went to the University of Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
and she got like a full scholarship for the first year, but then based on that, she apparently did so well that they covered all her costs for like the rest of her time.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. There are some schools that will offer, they're called usually presidential scholarships, and they cover your tuition for all 4 years that you're there. And then there might be additional scholarships that they can get to cover housing and those other expenses related to college. There's also UGMA and UTMA accounts. So those top three are not very common. The $2,000 per year, if you started when you were, born and contributing to that, then you'd have $36,000 by the time you went to college, or more, because it would gain interest. But that might cover the first year or the first couple of years, right? So that's not going to be enough by itself to cover all of your college expenses. The UGMA and UTMA accounts, some parents have securities. They have monies in things like art or real estate or something like that they want to transfer the value of that to the student. But you can't just do that directly. You can't just say, well, here's my Picasso painting. Have fun with that. You have to do it through this account, right? Because that allows, for both of them, it allows the parents to transfer that without having to appoint a trustee from the court or have an attorney for the student or something like that. But not a lot of folks have those kinds of assets. They don't necessarily have Picasso paintings and art and a lot of real estate and things like that, where they can transfer the value to the student. So the more common ones are the Michigan Education Trust, which is MET, and the Michigan Education Savings Program. And on your desks, you have 2 handouts for those. The first one that I want you to look at is MET, and that is a pre-college or a prepaid college savings plan. So parents or grandparents will create an account for you, and they will pay into that account every year in order to be able to save money and put it aside for college. There's also the Michigan Education Savings Program, and that's kind of an investing plan where folks will invest their money and make that money to set aside for college.
Ask a question.
Sure.
When you have these accounts, does it affect the grants that you get from the government or no?
That is a great question. She wants to know if you have a MET or an MESP, if it affects your grants that you're able to get from the college. So grants are need-based, and so your savings plan kind of helps you determine if you have financial need. It kind of throws that off a little bit. So the federal government knows that, and so what they have done is they've made rules about how it can count. So when you fill out a Fafsa and you apply for financial aid, you report that you have these accounts. And you tell them, I have this in savings. Now, what they're trying to figure out is how much you can contribute to the college. So they know that you have this resource. On the college's end, they don't look at whether or not you have a MET or an MESP and include that in the financial aid award. They're still looking at grants and things like that, scholarships, student employment, and loans. Because this is a resource for you, and we know that you have it, but it's not part of your financial aid package. So, not directly, but in a roundabout way they do. Because when you fill out the FAFSA, that goes toward your EFC, which stands for Expected Family Contribution. And we'll get into that a little bit more in the next section. But that stands for, it represents what the federal government thinks your family can contribute toward your educational costs. So it's not necessarily always the most reasonable number, but that MESP and that MET information is included in that calculation. And so they tell the school, here's how much the family can contribute. The school says, okay, so here's the financial need then that you have based on that information. And then they also will offer loans and things like that if you need that money to cover that expected family contribution. Maybe you didn't prepare ahead of time. Maybe you don't have, that money set aside because FAFSA doesn't take into account your expenses in your household. So there's all different scenarios. So they may offer a loan to cover that amount. It just depends on, kind of what exactly you're looking at in that award notification or on that FAFSA. So the MET, it locks in tuition prices at eligible public and private colleges and universities. So you can use a MET at multiple types of schools. The MESP does not lock in college costs. All plans for the MET cover the tuition and mandatory fees only. Some plans will allow you to purchase purchase a plan that will include housing costs as well. But at the bare minimum, what you need to go to college is tuition and any mandatory fees. The MESP covers all qualified higher education expenses. And what qualified higher education expenses means is things that are required to go to that college. So things like tuition, housing fees, books, and then any required supplies like computers. It does not include things like if you have to pay a fee for breaking something in the chemistry lab, or if you don't pay your bill on time and you get charged a late fee. It doesn't cover that kind of stuff. So for the MET, most plans will set up a lump sum that you have to pay each year. So maybe you're required to contribute $10,000. And it takes into account the beneficiary's age when they're doing that, so that they know that you're going to have enough money to cover whatever your educational plans are. For the MESP, they have contribution limits in excess of $200,000. That's a lot. the MET is guaranteed or backed by the state of Michigan. And most states will have a similar program. It's usually just a specific name that has to do with their state. So not everywhere is called MET. The Michigan Education Savings Plan program is not backed by the state. It's not guaranteed. It's an investment, so your money might decline in value. You may lose money. It may be something that you stay even and you don't even get a profit. So it's a little bit riskier. So a lot of folks will do an MESP when a student is younger, and maybe when they're a baby or when they're a toddler. I might sneeze. Apparently not. Okay. So the Michigan Education Trust, the MET, is going to have the requirements for if you have to be a state resident or not. So either the owner or the beneficiary for MET has to be a resident of the state of Michigan. So if your parents live in Ohio, or your grandparents, not your parents. If your parents live in Ohio, you probably live in Ohio. If your grandparents live in Ohio, they could still buy a MET contract for you and set money aside for you to go to college, and because you live in the state of Michigan. But if you both lived in Ohio, you'd be doing the Ohio plan. Yep.
Oh, okay. You just answered my question. I was about to ask, is there a plan for each state?
Yes, there's a plan for each state. Absolutely. The MESP does not have a residency requirement. So you might be able to kind of shop around and see what the best plan is for you. But it's primarily an investment plan, so it's going to be subject to market risk and things like that. It's not going to be something specific to the state. Also for the MET, there's a limited enrollment period. So there's certain times when you can purchase a MET contract. For the MESP, there's open enrollment. So you can get an MESP account at any time. Yes?
Another way to keep the cost down of college is to apply for the early college program.
Yeah, absolutely.
You start junior year and you take a half schedule at your home high school.
Mm-hmm.
Then a half schedule at the college, and the college pays for your books and all your credits. And then after your 13th year, you graduate with your associate's degree for
Yep, that's absolutely true. There's dual enrollment. There's also early college where you can, while you're in high school, also attend college classes and you get college credit and things like that. There's a lot of programs like that with universities as well as community colleges. And that saves a lot of time and a lot of money. You are not able to get financial aid in early college or dual enrollment. So if that's something that you are counting on, that's not going to apply to you just yet. But that's definitely a great way to kind of prepare and save money. Because typically when you're in that type of program, when you get into college, they're still considering you a first-time college student, so you're still eligible for a lot of financial aid. And if they were to consider you a transfer student, the amount of financial aid that you get is less. So it's definitely a great way to look at that if you have the time and the ability to dedicate yourself to enrolling in both college and high school classes as well at the same time. Yes?
Now, if you take AP classes in high school all 3 years, how much money will that save you from the fee?
It depends on, her question is if you take AP classes, how much money is that going to save you in college? It depends on the score on the test. So when you take the AP test, you can get a score. And that score, different schools will take different scores to give you so much college credit. So for example, if you get a 1 on an AP test, usually that will be 1 class worth of a college credit, so 4 college credit. So some schools, that will be hundreds and hundreds of dollars per credit. So that's $1,500 that you save. So it's definitely worth it to challenge yourself to take those rigorous classes. It also benefits you to take those AP classes because you're challenging yourself a little bit. So you're kind of training yourself to be in that college atmosphere, to go through things that are a little bit more difficult than what you may have experienced earlier in your high school career.
But that is an important decision that you have to make before you take those AP classes, because you have to decide which college or university you're going to be going to, or otherwise you lose those credits, right?
Well, the AP classes, when you take those AP classes, Those are classes at the high school that are academically rigorous, so they're a little bit more challenging than just your standard high school class. And students can take a test at the end of that class to test their knowledge and how well they absorb that information and how well they can apply it. And that can, usually any college will take certain scores from the AP tests. Yeah. Yes?
What if your school doesn't offer AP tests, but like a different type of thing?
You can, if your school doesn't offer the AP test, you can still take that test without having taken, without your school. It doesn't have to be a school-sponsored test.
Like, so I go to IA, which one other, do they do accept the IZ stuff? Yeah.
Yep.
It's just different because the scoring is different, but all colleges accept them.
Yeah, if you go to like an international academy or something where you get an IB credit, colleges will still accept that. They do kind of a calculation to figure out what that translates to at their school, but they'll still accept those credits. No worries, you didn't go through all 4 years to not be able to do that. So on your MET handout, it gives you some information about the MET contract. Do any of you have MET that you know of? Not sure? Maybe? Okay. The second handout that you have is a chart. And it says MESP at the top. And it's a chart to kind of explore what different kind of programs there are. And it includes that Coverdell and the UGMA and UTMA accounts. There's savings bonds that they've added on there as well, traditional IRAs, taxable accounts. And then the first few columns that you see, 529 plans general and 529 state prepaid plans, those are what we refer to as the MET. Those are 529 plans. So you'll be able to go through there, maybe tonight with your parents or this weekend sometime, and kind of look at all those different options and see kind of what your parents have taken advantage of and maybe what resources you have available to you. All right, so we've come to the end of our lecture part. What kind of questions do you still have? It doesn't just have to be about the information we covered today. It can be about college in general or all that good stuff. Yeah?
So say that you transfer schools like after a year or semester.
Mm-hmm.
I know that not all colleges accept the credit that you received. So how would the process, like, because you said that the financial aid wouldn't not go, like, is financial aid, does it depend on what type of college you go to? Because, like, will it be
Yes.
different at a public school, like, versus a private?
Absolutely. Her question is, will financial aid change depending on the type of school that you go to? And absolutely. Across the board, community colleges tend to offer less financial aid than four-year institutions, partly because the cost is much less to go to a community college, and so you don't need that much financial aid. Partly because of the resources that the school has as well. So, for example, you're always going to be able to get federal grants at whatever kind of school you go to. But community colleges don't usually offer loans, or if they do, they offer short of what you're truly eligible for at your maximum. Because they know that if you go to a four-year, you're more likely to need the loans at the four-year institution than you would at the community college. There's also the transfer issue to consider as well. Some students will attend a college for a little bit, like my student that we didn't have her major that she wanted, and so she was transferring. Some students decide before they even go to college, I'm only going to go here for a couple years and then I'm going to transfer. If you start off at a community college and then go to a four-year, you're considered a transfer student. And typically, what happens to your financial aid is it decreases because transfer students aren't eligible for nearly as much financial aid from the colleges as they would be had they started there in their freshman year. So the other thing to consider is whether the credits transfer. So one class that you take at one school They may have the same type of class at another school, but it's not necessarily going to be the same curriculum, the same rigor, and things like that. So some classes that you take don't transfer to your new school. And so in a roundabout way, you've kind of wasted money. Even though it's contributed to your education and your personal experience, that class may not count toward the new degree that you're seeking. Yeah.
What's the best way to avoid transferring from schools to not lose that benefit of the financial?
That's a great question. She asked what the best way is to avoid transferring schools so that that doesn't happen to you. Well, the best way to do that is to start looking at colleges early. Start to figure out what type of school you want to attend, where you want to go, what kind of experiences you want. Try to figure out kind of what's going to help you best in your academic experience there. Do they have your major? Does one school have a particular element to an academic program that another school doesn't have? And you have to look at fit too. You have to look at how much you enjoy being at that school. So visiting campuses, going for things like, plays and sporting events and things like that is important. Going on tours, because that school is going to send somebody around with you to show you all the stuff that they have at that school, but they're going to give you information that you would never think to ask. And so going on a tour is important, but going to other events as well. There's all different kinds of events that colleges have. So there are things like giant open houses where thousands of students and their parents go and attend, and they talk to different people, and they go on tours, and there's faculty members there, and they talk to people that work in the student service departments. Those are all great resources because you can then talk to a professor that teaches in the program that you're interested in. And you can see kind of what's the personal connection. You can see, if you maybe they have a particular graduate assistant program that you want to get into, and you know that you can do this, this, and this to get into that program. It's also about, building relationships and things like that. There are smaller events where you maybe go and take a tour and then you have lunch with a faculty member. Maybe you shadow a student in their typical day at the school. So there's all kinds of opportunities. So don't just visit a school once. Go multiple times, but go to different kinds of things that they have.
Sometimes you have to do your own homework.
Oh, absolutely.
I was the first one to go into the university of my family.
Mm-hmm.
And I had nobody to help me or teach me, this is how you do it,
Mm-hmm.
this is what you need to do, this
Me
is
neither.
where you need to go. I had to crawl before I can walk.
Yep.
The thing that I learned is when you go into a college or university, make sure you're focused on what you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most important thing when you first walk into a university.
Yep.
Because nobody ever told me, hey, this is the curriculum that you need for medical school. These are the classes that you need to take. This is the major that you need to go into.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody ever taught me that.
Yep.
I was changing from liberal arts. I didn't know what to major, biology, chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how am I going to get to medical school? Nobody was there to support you.
Yep.
Nobody was there to tell you, this is what you need, this is how you have to do it, this is how you're going to get there.
And that's a good point. And some things have changed in that realm over the years. Academic advising is much more involved now, so you have folks that are guiding you along the way. So that has changed a little bit, but what she says is mostly true. You have to know where you're going, what you're doing, what you want to do, and that kind of help you motivate yourself through difficult things. For example, I had to take statistics when I was doing my psychology program, and it was statistics with a math professor that did statistics for a living, and I did not do math for a living at all, and so it was really hard for me, and I did not do well. Well, I had to take it again when I had my master's program, and so I took it again, but he did his for an education program, so it was a little bit more relevant to what I had. I had to take it again for my PhD, and by then I had learned, okay, this is how I learn best. This is what I need to get myself through this class. But it was all with an end goal in mind of, okay, you have to get through this class in order to do this major. So don't change your major just because you have one hard class or something like that. So, well, that is all the time we have, and there are some folks out there waiting for you. So thank you so much for attending this week, and we will see you next time.